it would authorize $600 million a year for 8 years. That's $4.8 billion for grants to local trauma-informed cross-sector coalitions. It basically would be the funding source for what we consider the most important element in the trauma-informed program. It also would do something else to make the work of the community groups easier. It will allow what's called grading of federal funds. It would allow local communities to combine funds from different federal pots, put it all into a single pot called Trauma Informed, and use it to launch a local comprehensive trauma informed program. So right now, many local groups are really constrained by the siloing of federal funding. This has to be used for opioids, and this has to be used for suicide programs. This has to be used for child abuse. But all of those we know are problems whose underlying cause is trauma. So you really need a comprehensive approach that addresses the underlying trauma if you're going to help solve those problems. And this would allow local communities to pool funding from all of those programs whose underlying cause of trauma into a pot to solve trauma in your community. So those two programs alone can really dramatically change the landscape. Jesse, you want to talk about the other provisions in the program?
So there is some language that also expands on protection for children and youth exposed to violence and other youth and infant programs, as well as, sorry, just letting people in from the waiting room. The in investment in workforce development is a big aspect of it. So educators would get trauma training, healthcare workers would get trauma training, other community leaders would all get some form of trauma training. And there is still a question around what constitutes trauma training, but this is showing progress in Congress toward promoting trauma-informed care within workplaces and across the country, which is also huge. Like Dan said, Section 101 is by far the biggest. Section 101 being the grants to communities are the biggest aspect of the Rise from Trauma Act, but there are other pieces that also get into National Health Corps practices within hospital systems for people who experience trauma and more. So that's sort of a brief overview. Dan, is there anything else that you want to touch on?
Two other important provisions address law enforcement. They would set up a center to help train local law enforcement agencies on how to integrate trauma-informed programs into their activities. And we all know that's a really important issue. And there's also grant funding for local trauma-informed programs and local law enforcement agencies. Let me take a break. I saw that Elizabeth Pruitt's on. I just want our co-host from PACES Connection. Elizabeth, you want to introduce yourself? And
Sure. Great to be with you. I'm the policy analyst for PACES Connection, and I cover a lot of these issues. And we're also a supporter of the RISE bill and very excited about the provisions that relate to the community coalitions. And the fact that Senator Durbin and others that, that it's a bipartisan bill is really huge in this climate that we're in. It's a rare thing to have equal number of Republicans and Democrats on a bill, and it's an opportunity for our coalitions that are growing around the country to showcase what they're doing with their senators and really promote this as something that could be included in the budget reconciliation bill, or just going forward. It would not pass as a standalone bill, but when opportunities come up, such as the reconciliation bill, this is a really important provision that could find its way, and we could be living in a different universe as far as what kind of support these coalitions that are doing amazing work now, but could do a lot more with sustained funding.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Mhm.
So we've been bragging to the staff of the senators what a huge network there is and how many people around the country are involved in implementing trauma-informed programs. So they've asked us to prove it by getting additional senators to co-sponsor the bill. We right now have 4, as Elizabeth mentioned. 2 are Democrats, Senator Durbin and Senator Duckworth from Illinois, Senator Murkowski and Senator Capito from West Virginia and Alaska. But if the bill is going to get acted on, if the money is going to show up in the reconciliation bill, there needs to be a groundswell of support within the Senate. The leadership needs to see that this is an issue a large number of senators care about. So we're asking you to do 2 things. First, if you have a relationship with your senator or staff of your senator, please tap it now. This will be the best use of that relationship that we're going to have for a long time. Call them up, email them, and encourage them to co-sponsor the RISE Act. It's S2086, Senate Bill S2086. And Jesse will put a link to a 1-page description of it. And I think there's been an article in Paces Connection very recently about it as well. But again, please pull out all stops. Milk any relationship you have with your senator or senator's office. They're all coming home for their August recess in another few days. And that's the best time to catch them if you find a way to do that. They're usually holding town halls or other events. So keep your eyes open for opportunities to get in front of them and to ask them to co-sponsor the bill. And then Jesse, you want to talk about the other step we need you people to take?
So there's a few different opportunities. I'm struggling to put the 1-pager into the chat. But for the statewide coordinators, at least, you should have received at least 1, maybe 2 emails with information on form language to send to Senate staff, as well as an opportunity to email us and ask for who those Senate staff are if you don't know the names. And the 1-pager that Dan was referring to is attached there. And so we can follow up with that. Stacy just put in the chat the link. Stacy, thank you so much. So the link that Stacy just put has the 1-pager information. And for those who are looking to conduct outreach and want some of the form language, please feel free to email me if you haven't already received that. And it would be great to take that personal step as a constituent to reach out to both of your Senate offices and put that in there. Another way to more easily take action is with this form. And this is also something that you can mobilize for mass support through your advocates, through your networks. And it's simply a form that you fill out, takes the information from your state, and then there's automatically an email and tweet that you can send to your senators. And that's another way to take action. Again, mass support and mobilization around getting Senate co-sponsors here is going to be so important to the passage of this act. So we ask that you take action. And again, with the August recess coming up, in the email that you send, there is absolutely an opportunity to request a meeting with those staffers as well.
Jesse, I had a question, or Jesse
Lisa.
or Dan. Is there, just for my knowledge going in, is there any pushback or consistent feedback that you've heard from other senator staff or senators that we just should be prepared to answer when we reach out? Or has it all been positive and nothing to worry about? I just like to know going in if there's any like things that are common questions that we're going to get.
So in the conversations that I've had with Senate staff, it is mostly positive and people certainly understand the importance of it. The big question is, is this similar to VAWA or the Violence Against Women's Act or other pieces of legislation that specific offices are aware of. And by the way, it's always okay to say, I don't know, and I can get back to you if you get a question that you genuinely don't know the answer to. And then some of the staff expect that there is a large sum of money. And so they're asking why this sum is so much, what this would take away from. Are there ways to sort of essentially just like reason through why that amount of money is there? Are the two concerns. Other than that, just very positive feedback in the conversations with staffers that I've gotten. And Alex, I see that your hand is up.
Let me just follow up. When in terms of the justifying the money, PACES has identified almost 1,000 local trauma-informed coalitions. So $600,000 it needs to be spread out over 1,000 local groups. They're all doing trauma-informed work in the community. So that number is not just pulled out of the air. It reflects the actual need out there. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jess.
Alex, I see your hand up.
Yes, I was going to speak on this I appreciate the systems. I'm speaking as a Brit here, so I appreciate the political systems might be slightly different in America, and if they are, I'll defer to that. But one thing that we found is very, very effective in our lobbying and our raising of trauma within the United Kingdom is if you can research your individual senator and find out what it is they're specifically interested in, because as you'll appreciate, there's any number of interest groups that are trying to get the attention of our elected representatives. And if you can find something the senators said about violence, about drug abuse, about domestic violence, about mental health provision, and you can tie it back to adverse childhood experience, you can say, look, 3 years ago, you spoke in the Senate on your concern about violence against women, and you can say, are you aware this is being driven by adverse childhood experiences? And suddenly when you take their words and you've turned it into a very good argument, you become a much more effective advocate and lobbyist, because you've actually done the background work on that particular person, and it makes you much more compelling when you show that you've done the research on them, rather than, because in the United Kingdom there's any number of groups where they encourage the constituents to bombard the representative en masse with 400 identical emails, and you can imagine opening an inbox and you've got 400 emails and it's basically the same thing. Suddenly someone else comes along and says, well, look, you said this and this is why I want to talk to you about it. Suddenly the elected representative becomes that much more interested because the research has been done on them.
Absolutely, Alex. Doing background research, finding those common grounds, especially because when you get those conversations, it can be very limited in terms of time. Just helps you get right to the punch and can be so important. So thank you for that. And
because of that, I've actually managed to get access to people who aren't my elected representatives, because I've done the research and approached my non-elected representatives and said, look, you don't have to speak to me. I'm not a constituent, but I know that you're interested in this and we're doing this. Many, many politicians have actually responded positively because I found that common ground.
That's great. That's great advice. Thank you.
Thank you. No problem.
Dan, do you have anything else about RISE, or do you want to get into?
Just one last point. I'm a masochist. I've spent this morning reading through the appropriations report for the Labor, Health and Human Services and Education Committee, House Committee, and the government is spending something like $2 trillion on health and social service and education programs. And you go through it and they're spending $1 billion on addressing opioids without putting any money into addressing the underlying cause of opioids. They're spending $1 billion on other substance abuse programs. They're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on suicide prevention, again, without addressing the underlying cause of trauma. So one of the issues you could make is this money will eventually save the federal government a lot of money, because instead of throwing all this money at the symptoms of these problems, you're going to be spending money going upstream to prevent them from happening in the first place. So this will eventually pay the government back, and it's a great return on investment. Okay.
That's our job as advocates. So, absolutely. The other two pieces of legislation that we wanted to quickly touch on before jumping into other topics, just to show you the continued momentum around it within Congress. around trauma-informed activity. One is called the Strong Support for Children's Act, which we have another link to take quick action on. This was introduced in the House, so this would be to reach out to your congressperson. But there is money grant program that is going to local public health agencies to support recognition, studying, and trying to find avenues to ameliorate and address trauma within our society's most marginalized and oppressed communities that face, in many circumstances, the highest levels of trauma. This was introduced by Carolyn Maloney and Ayanna Presley on the House side. And there is, within the definition section, it intentionally recognizes the trauma, the intergenerational trauma of poverty, racism, and other forms of oppression. It has a pretty long list that we certainly want to highlight and is a strong stance for Congress to be taken. And so we are excited about the introduction of the Strong Support for Children's Act, the reintroduction of the Strong Support for Children's Act. And then one other piece of legislation that was introduced in June is called ACERT, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences Response Teams. And that is within law enforcement when there is a potentially traumatic call that would impact a child. There would be a team that comes around the child. This was piloted in New Hampshire, where there is the law enforcement officer, some sort of clinical social worker or other support staff, and then a community leader to come around the child and provide wraparound services depending on what they need. And so we just wanted to lift up that those are more opportunities, and there are more pieces of legislation coming out. Just a few weeks ago, there was a piece on safe schools, and that there is also community violence legislation that has recently been introduced. And so we continue to see more and more progress and opportunity for advocates, and that momentum is creating more and more opportunities for advocates. So just to say that there's a lot of momentum and we should keep the movement going. And that is largely because of the work of all of you and what you're doing within your communities.
Jesse, Marlo just sent a note in the chat about it. Somebody sent an email saying, well, there's some talking points. Marlo, you want to describe the document that you just put on this chat?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Frameworks Institute, with support from Prevent Child Abuse America and the Alliance for Strong Families and Communities, produced this report based on framing science earlier this year. And you can, with confidence, take the advice that's in that report and use it to help inform your talking points and working in sort of framing up how the importance of all of the pieces of legislation that Jesse mentioned to the work of addressing adverse childhood experiences. So I think some of you may have seen this. There's the report, there's a recorded webinar, and some other tools to support you in using the information. But I just, like I said in my chat, I got in on the tail end and I heard you talking about how to talk with members of Congress. So I wanted to make sure folks knew about that resource.
Thank you. You got in just in time. So, why don't we move on now to, we've got three other subjects we want to cover. One is the Rescue Act. That's money that's already pouring into your community. It's not earmarked for trauma-informed programs. It can be spent on trauma-informed programs, but that will only happen through your advocacy. So, Jesse, you want to start with, you and Marlo start with talking about the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA?
Sure. So the American Rescue Plan Act, a lot of people recognize as where the stimulus payments came out of, the direct support for families. But like Dan said, there are other buckets of money that went to programs that address issues like trauma, housing, hunger, childcare, and also historic financing wins that helped to cut child poverty in half and was the largest investment in childcare that our country has seen. And so there is still time, even though this bill was passed in March, to mobilize around the funds that are available through the American Rescue Plan Act, but we need to start moving now around these funds because people are starting to create their budgets, but the opportunities really exist where people talk about mental health in the bill. we as advocates can help to flip the paradigm about how people look at mental health from just being a treatment model to working towards systemic supports of creating trauma-informed environments, approaches, programs, environments, and systems, and really moving upstream on what our mental health prevention work looks like, because we know that across society that is more effective. And this is once in a lifetime money, $1.9 trillion in all. Not all of that can go to trauma-informed supports, obviously, but there is a lot of money that we will get into the big buckets on. And our two asks sort of across, as advocates across all of these buckets, are to spend funding in support of trauma-informed and healing-centered approaches, programs, environments, and systems, like I just said, and also asking decision makers to make decisions and design and deliver interventions through a trauma-informed and healing-centered lens. So the four broad buckets within the American Rescue Plan Act that we can mobilize around, that we see a lot of potential for advocates to be able to sort of get some money directed toward trauma-informed supports, are in the education and early childhood education systems, physical, behavioral, and mental health care, child maltreatment prevention and emergency assistance, and aid to state, local, and tribal governments. I will start quickly with an overview of the ESSER funds, which is elementary and secondary school emergency relief funding. And in the K-12 system, there is $122.6 billion, 90% of which is going to local education agencies, which is another way to say school districts. There is a subsection that allows for these funds to be spent on mental health supports, which again, we can advocate for trauma-informed supports. And in the trauma-informed movement, there's probably no better system that has evidence supporting the promise of trauma-informed supports than in the education system. We have seen suspensions and expulsions reduce. We have seen teacher turnover reduce. We have seen outcomes improve within grades and behaviors and social sort of settings within schools because of trauma-informed supports. And so because of the vast amount of money, again, we want to leverage one-time funds to be spent strategically. And so putting in place trainings, especially a train the trainer model within the school that would allow for more, for new teachers in the future to sort of get that training and continue to promote the shared understanding and language around trauma and the impacts of stress and adversity have on children and staff is a huge opportunity. We know that we need to help address the mental health of staff in general, because as Dr. Bruce Perry says, dysregulated adults cannot help to regulate dysregulated children. And as kids and staff are coming back into the school environments this coming year, we know that there are going to be elevated levels of stress. We have already seen increased incidences around the country of school violence, gun violence in schools. We have seen youth suicide way, way up. And there is a massive need to leverage these funds to promote trauma-informed educational environments. Marlo, do you want to touch on the early childhood education piece a bit?
Sure. And I also, for folks to see in the chat, I just said if you in a few bullet points could share some of the things that you're already doing where you may be getting traction, because I know several of you have heard us talk about this before, and I know you may already be moving ahead with some work in your states. It'd be great to know. On the childcare piece, within the Childcare Stabilization Fund, which is a good portion of the childcare money that's coming to your states, there is the allowance to spend to address, hold on one second.
While Marlo is doing that, I will put in the chat on our website, so you all know we have a webinar that went into further detail about all of these funds, one-pagers, talking points, and an overall summary of the American Rescue Plan Act. So I'll put that in the chat right now, just so that you have it. Don't feel like you have to vigorously take notes.
Sorry about that. A little household coordination needed there. Okay, I'm back. So within the Child Care Stabilization Fund, it's a program that the state has to subgrant money to qualified child care providers. The providers have to spend the money on at least one of 6 different things. And 5 of those 6 things are related to childcare business, recruitment, retention, having PPE, reconfiguring spaces for safety relative to COVID, that kind of thing. The sixth one is addressing the mental health needs of staff and children in care. What we know about the childcare industry, it is very, very stressed right now. And, you know, there's been a lot of loss of childcare slots. So there is a strong momentum to focus and which we support, focusing on the business side of just keeping childcare centers open and keeping that the availability, accessibility going in states. But the sort of downside of that very laudable activity is that that one item about addressing mental health could easily get overlooked. And so folks like you are really important to get into that conversation and say, you know, let us help you figure out how to work on that item of being able to address mental health. And then, as Jesse was saying earlier, really making sure there's a comprehensive understanding of mental health to encompass not only treatment and intervention and counseling and consultation, things like that, but also to make childcare environments fully trauma informed. So in the flow of daily life, and you all know this, I'm preaching the choir on this one, but just so you can help your colleagues who have decision-making power over that childcare money, that in the daily flow of life, that everyone is equipped to respond, recognize and respond to trauma. So we are at the national level through CTIP, we're developing something we're calling a plug and play, which is a framework for how you would go about making at a systems level, having an approach that helps the childcare system become trauma informed. And we'll be presenting that in early August to a group of state child care administrators, which we hope will grease the wheels for then folks like you in your states to be able to follow up and say to them, you know, we can be your partner on the ground with implementing something like this. There is so much money in the Child Care Stabilization Fund that making the whole child care system trauma informed is a relatively inexpensive budget item. So we think that the case still has to be made. You have to understand that you're competing with some major business issues related to keeping childcare going in the states. And you bring an important part of the conversation, because part of the workforce issue, we believe, has to do with secondary trauma. And so that recruiting and retaining childcare providers, teachers, and just the whole ecosystem of adults who provide childcare has to do with addressing their trauma. And so obviously that the way that provision is written in the law to address the mental health needs of staff and children in care gives you a wonderful opening to go in and help them figure out the steps to take to do that. And I do think there's momentum around the country to think about early childhood mental health consultation, which we are also in support of, but it is a more interventional kind of strategy. So still having a trauma-informed kind of public health type trauma-informed approach is a nice complement to that. We also know that there are workforce shortages for providing infant and early childhood mental health. So another kind of point of advocacy for having a systems level public health type fundamental approach to having the whole system become trauma informed is that it equips all the adults who are already in the ecosystem with knowing how to recognize and respond to trauma, which has to do, which sort of gets at that workforce issue, because you're not saying this has to add a bunch of people to the workforce to pull this off. This is about equipping the people who are in the workforce to have knowledge that they need. So I think we can probably offer up, well, I know we can offer up, and if you all would like, once we've pulled this plug and play together and we've got our presentation together, where we will be including all of the research that demonstrates how this helps address expulsion, preschool expulsion, how we believe it can help address secondary trauma, as well as helping address the children's needs related to the trauma they've experienced. I think we can offer up that presentation to this group if you're interested, probably at a meeting in the second half of August, or maybe your September meeting, if that's of interest.
So we'll keep folks updated with that. Thank you, Marlo. Beth, I want to let you know that we will get to your question in a moment here. But just to highlight a few other buckets that there is funding. There is money that went to state, local, and tribal governments, which is a massive opportunity to create systems-wide commitment to becoming trauma-informed, resilience-focused, and healing-centered. Obviously, that advocacy would be within those different levels of government. And to Beth's question, within each level of government, if it's a county-led state versus a non-county-led state, that structure may look different, but people within those systems, if you have relationships, should be able to point you in the right direction. And if you don't, just conducting outreach around that would be huge. Like we said, the money that's going to local education agencies, the advocacy needs to be done at the school district level. And the money that is in that childcare stabilization fund, a lot of that money is going to be going to qualified childcare providers. And so that advocacy becomes even more granular. Dan, did you have something to add in?
The vast majority of the money going to state, local, tribal governments is going to local governments, counties, towns. They are seeing money that they never saw before in terms of discretionary money. And fortunately, those are also the entities that are closest to you. So the city council, the mayor, the county council, the county health department are the ones that are deciding how to spend that money. So it's at a level that's easier to access. And that's where the big bucks are. Same thing in education. The money is not going as much to the State Department of Education as it is to the local education agency. So it's your school board, your superintendent of schools who are making that decision. And again, these are people who you should be able to have access to.
And so just if you go to that website that I will share one more time, there is more information on all of the buckets of funding. For time's sake, because there's a lot that a few other topics and some questions that we want to get from all of you, I will just leave that in the chat, but just recognize that this is a massive opportunity, once in a lifetime opportunity. The stimulus only came because of a horrific emergency that was going on that we hope does not come around for another long while yet or ever again. And so please take the initiative and encourage others to go out and mobilize as best as possible around these funds that are available, because it can create additional advocacy efforts. If we see these funds mobilized in a positive way, they end up having positive outcomes, we can then mobilize as advocates to say, we need more in the future. This is what more funding can do. This is why schools becoming trauma-informed is so important. And so this is really an important opportunity to take advantage of.
Can I just say is it okay if I say one last thing, just as a piece of advice? I'm hearing that decision makers in states are starting to say, we're not going to spend this money to hire staff. So I think you can anticipate a pushback. And by that, I mean, like, for example, if you want to broaden an infant and early childhood mental health consultation program that already exists in the state, that's going to take a number of mental health professionals to do that. So, and you could just play that out for the school system, for any of the systems. It's going to, when you're dealing with addressing human needs, you're talking about hiring professionals. So I would just really encourage you to think about how you're going to refute that and basically say, and we're working on this, so we may have some language we could share later, but basically be prepared to make the case for this is a time, just like when the state mobilizes to respond to a natural disaster, this is a time to mobilize for the immediate effects of the pandemic. And if between now and 2026, when the ARPA funds have to be spent, you could put in place folks that get people restabilized after the pandemic, that it's important, it's vital really to do that, even if you have to add new staff. So I don't have I wish I had language and everything for you. I just want to flag it for you now, because I think all of us who are working to address human needs and the things that we know people are dealing with because of the pandemic are going to meet with that argument. And I just think we need to be prepared to make the case that it's the time to add people to address these needs, even if we can only do it for 4 years. And the next part of that is, and for you all to be watching for, and all the legislative update that Jesse gave plays into this, is that what we're seeing is there's momentum building in Congress, and with the kind of leadership the Biden-Harris administration is giving right now, it's very like two things are possible. Very likely that there will be more federal money flowing in the future to sustain the kinds of things that you might successfully get in place now in states. And there's also the likelihood that in 4 years, with a comprehensive effort, you could change the way the need is balanced in a state. So if you successfully keep a lot of children and families out of the child welfare system, you potentially save money there that then after 4 years could be redirected. So basically a systems restructuring. So just think big about this, and when someone throws up a barrier, really think about that barrier may be coming out of their fear or their past experience, and not about today's current situation and what's possible.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Marla.
Marlo. We've got two other subjects we want to cover. Other sources of money, going from the trillions to the peanut money, at least from Washington. The Center for Disease Control Injury Prevention Program has just announced grants of $250,000 to 23 states and larger grants to 5 states to be used for addressing childhood trauma. Now, the catch is that it can be used for traumatic brain injury programs, automobile safety, or it can be used for implementing adverse childhood experience programs. In a second, I'll read the states that have gotten the money, but I see Jen O'Connor's on the line, and I know New York State Department of Health has used this money from CDC to implement an adverse childhood experience education program. So Jen, do you want to talk just for a second about how you've used the CDC money? And I didn't prepare her for this, so
I know you did not prepare me, Dan. I'm not prepared to say. I'm not, I will be very honest, I'm not 100% sure, but I can tell you that in New York, we are moving forward with a lot of trauma-informed work, and there are really great conversations happening both kind of in the legislature, across the legislature, and with different state agencies. So I'll get a more specific answer back to you soon.
Okay, I did see from reading the material that Prevent Childhood, Child Abuse, which you work for, has partnered with the Department of Health and are doing training programs around the state on adverse childhood experiences. And apparently that's being funded with the CDC money.
Well, and so part of that work is training leadership around trauma-informed practice. So we've always done a lot of work at different levels of the community. The project with Department of Health is specific to like top tier admin team folks, making sure that the leadership of an organization is trauma informed and has that buy-in, so that then it can start to trickle down. So that's the it was a brand new project to us a couple of months ago.
Okay, but it shows that even though it's only a small amount of money, if used wisely, it can really make a difference by hitting the key decision makers. So this money is going to state departments of public health, the state departments of health, and how they use it will, to some degree, you have an ability to impact. So I'm going to read off the list real quickly, but you ought to get a hold of your departments of public health and talk to them about using some of that CDC money for adverse childhood experience programs. Alaska, California, Georgia, Illinois, Kansas, Maryland, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Mississippi, Montana, New Mexico, New York, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Virginia, Washington, Colorado, Minnesota, Nebraska, North Carolina, Oregon, and Tennessee. So if you're in any of those states, contact your Department of Public Health and advocate with them. Perhaps you can do what Jen has been able to do, is partner with them to implement trauma-informed education programs in your state. Go ahead, Jen. You have, did you want to add something, Jen? Oh, okay. Again, that's a small amount of money that can really be used very strategically, as they have in New York.
And the last bit of funding that we wanted to touch on is a larger amount of funding that could be strategically used for similar purposes, and that is the very likely upcoming opioid settlement money. The last hurdle is that states and municipalities have to agree to use the funds, because if the settlement is reached, then the three largest pharmaceutical companies that were held responsible for the opioid crisis in 2017, 2018 cannot be sued again. And so that is the last hurdle. But if they get past that, a settlement was reached and agreed upon that would distribute $26 billion across the country for prevention and treatment services to respond to the opioid epidemic. And we believe that there is a massive opportunity in this area. A quick personal anecdote: I got involved with the trauma-informed movement primarily around the opioid epidemic in 2017, 2018 as an intern for the Office of Attorney General in Pennsylvania, where the fentanyl and carfentanil that were being introduced into the drug supply created the need for more upstream prevention, because treatment was no longer an option when people were unfortunately passing the first time, in many cases, that they were using the drug. And so there are similarly opportunities to now fund statewide and citywide efforts to create trauma-informed, prevention-focused supports to combat the opioid crisis. And we know that after COVID or during COVID, overdose deaths actually surpassed what we saw in 2017 and 2018. So the need for these funds to go toward upfront prevention services or upstream prevention services are as relevant as they've ever been. We can continue to say that we know that stress and adversity impact addiction and substance use. Addiction often hides and masks pain, and we need to reach those deep needs of people and communities to help really come to an understanding as a country and start to make headway on preventing overdose deaths. And this money creates those opportunities to really begin those efforts and sustain them for quite a bit of time. And the last talking point, which I'm sure we all know, is that talking about ACEs, we know that ACEs are directly correlated with intravenous drug usage and other forms of drug use. If you have 4 or more ACEs, which is between 12.5% and 18% of the population, depending on the study, you are more than 1,000% more likely to partake in intravenous drug usage. You are more than, I believe that it's twice as likely, or maybe as high as 700% greater likelihood of partaking in or becoming alcoholic or having a cigarette addiction. And those are direct correlations from the ACEs study that we can use as advocates. Dan, is there more that you want to talk about with the stimulus funds?
No, I want to talk about the opioid money.
I meant settlement. Yep.
What we've seen is a lot of advocacy from the treatment world, therapists pushing for use of this money for treatment. And so there's going to be a major push to devote all this money to treatment and not to prevention.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that's really the responsibility of everybody on this phone, is to educate your decision makers, who will be, again, it'll be the state legislature, the governor, the mayor, the city council, on how to spend this money, that if all they focus on prevention, they can be assured the next generation and the generation after that will also have an addiction problem. So you need to go to bat again. Everything we've said over the last hour is the money ends up in the places we want it to end up, only because of your advocacy. A lot of money out there, but as usual, a lot of hands reaching out for it, and it'll end up in the making a difference in the childhood trauma area only if you get out there and fight. Not literally. I don't
No,
wanna-
fight in a trauma-informed way.
Yeah. I don't want to
Um,
sound like Trump on January 6th.
We want to also encourage everybody not just to advocate alone, but advocate as part of a community and get others in your network involved in all of these advocacy asks, because there are strength in numbers. Earlier, I put into the chat the link to join the National Trauma Campaign. You can send that out or just communicate the calls to action that we share with others in your networks, because there is a massive opportunity here. And if we illustrate the groundswell of support around the country, we will continue to see this momentum produce other opportunities that we can then advocate and mobilize around, that will continue to feed the development of a trauma-informed United States, and hopefully someday a trauma-informed world. Dan, is there anything else on the pieces of legislation or opportunities that we covered before we get into our Q&A?
I think we've thrown 4 tasks to you. We know you didn't have much on your plate, so we know it won't be a problem implementing all these. No, we know everybody is very busy, and that, but these are 4 initiatives that can really make a difference in helping promote your program. So we hope in your very, very busy schedule, doing great work, you're able to spend time focusing on these sources of funding, because ultimately money drives everything else. And then finally, what we wanted to talk about is there an interest in structuring these calls and structuring the relationship among the statewide coordinators in a more formal way? Jesse, you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so we would love to have these opportunities, similar to how Dan and I manage CTIP CAN calls on a monthly basis. They are regular, and we have community advocates coming to them to continue the learning process. We would love to have regularly structured calls with statewide and community leaders and others who are interested in continuing to hear the opportunities, talk through the various legislative opportunities very directly, and continuing to move the movement forward in that direction. But we wanted to solicit and get your feedback on what would be most useful for you. They don't always have to be an hour long. There was just a lot of opportunity during this one, but what would you all like to see, so that we can continue to keep in touch in a regularly systematic and structured fashion that works for your schedule and helps us continue to gain momentum? Jason, did you have a thought to start us off? And to Linda's question, yes, this would not replace CTIP CAN. CTIP CAN is firmly 3rd Wednesday of the month from 2 to 3:30 Eastern. And these would differ as direct conversations with statewide and community coordinators to discuss legislative and other advocacy opportunities in the trauma-informed field. CTIP CAN really goes into, most of the CTIP CAN call are sector-specific conversations that address and promote the advancement of trauma-informed practices, and this would be a little bit more on the advocacy side.
Jesse, I have a question
Mhm.
very quickly.
Sure.
I would be interested in obtaining as much resources that I can, because I have been very blessed to be able to write in our local newspapers. And if there's one way I can get information out there, that would be it. But I need to just get an idea where your resources, where I could find them online, whether they're websites or, anything in general relating to what we're talking about.
So a few ideas. One, traumacampaign.org has
Okay.
a lot of advocacy toolkits, and also describes the National Trauma Campaign and what we advocate around. PACE's Connection has information from
Okay.
a ton of communities, and CTIP.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one? I'm sorry.
I will put them in the chat. So we
awesome.
have traumacampaign.org.
Got that one.
We have PACE's Connection.
Okay, I'm a member of PACES.
And then we
Okay.
have ctip.org as places to start, at least. And I'm
Okay.
sure that there are many others. If other
Okay.
folks have other resources, feel free to put them in the chat now
Okay,
for folks.
thank
And-
you.
Sure. Bridget?
Hey, thank you. So I do like the idea of having these kind of focused conversations around advocacy with other state leaders. Could you speak a little bit to how you might structure those conversations? You have the office hours, which are really helpful, but informal. So can you talk a little bit about, would we sort of know what the topic might be or the focus? What is your thinking around that?
So it will largely depend on what is available to advocate around, but essentially we see with this group of community leaders and statewide coordinators that the grassroots mobilization that we really want to harness through the National Trauma Campaign will be able to better mobilize with all of the people on this call, in addition to us. And so in terms of getting folks within your states to mobilize around getting Senate co-sponsors for the Rise from Trauma Act, calls like this that allow for us to provide that information to a specific group of folks will be very helpful. It also allows for networking to learn from state to state how people are mobilizing and what successes or problems people have had. And then as new opportunities continue to come out, it will allow for us to have a direct link to mobilize quickly around the opportunities. I am sure that as we continue to do this, like what happened with CTIP can, we will learn and it will take on a new structure in new ways. But that's sort of the initial thinking behind this and why we think that it would be so important. Dan, do you want to expand? You're on mute.
I had to mute, my dog was barking. The one long-term thought is there a desire of an association of statewide trauma-informed coordinators, an actual organization that tries to become a political force at the national level as well as at your state level.
Thanks for that. And just as a follow-up piece, so that I'm understanding, so it sounds like this would be kind of geared towards big kind of nationwide mobilization activities, which is great. Do you also envision an opportunity to hear from other states about what they're doing? And I'll just give an example from today when you called on New York to talk about what they're doing with that CDC funding. Jen mentioned an issue that's been a challenge for us in a lot of our systems, which is leadership buy-in. So I was able to IM her, we're going to have a conversation. That's a really good outcome for our call. And I'm just wondering how much that might be built in as well.
Actually, that's been the subject for most of our calls. Well, usually, so we have presentations on what states are doing. So I thank you for reminding us. We're thinking way more than just advocacy, but right now my brain got stuck on advocacy. But yeah, we've had great presentations because I know every state coordinator is struggling with the same issues of how do we make it happen in our states? Should we be a state entity? Should we be a nonprofit? How do we mobilize? So the answer is yes, it would be a source of technical assistance. And I know PACES Connection also provides that, but that's really what we've been using our quarterly calls for.
This would just organize in a new way. And yeah, I think that, if that's very important, I mean, Bridget, that's key feedback. We can have different states presenting each month as well, or communities to explain what they're doing in various areas. So that way that resource sharing is sort of facilitated through these calls. Thank you. Are there any other thoughts on that? There is one other question that we have if we have time, but want to hear your thoughts. So the last question from us, at least, and happy to stay on the line a little bit more if folks have other thoughts or questions, is have anybody seen success or has anybody had success in mobilizing around American Rescue Plan Act questions? Ooh, I missed Elizabeth. I apologize. Elizabeth?
I was just going to say, in fact, Bridget and I had a conversation earlier in the week. I think there's some fundamental issues that state association or state coalitions are dealing with. Everything from, what can we do without jeopardizing our nonprofit status? So I think, the sharing about programs and opportunities is terrific. And there's also some basic needs to address. How do we get organized? How do we, involve our board? How do we make them feel comfortable? that we're advocating in a way that, is within, the legal confines of a nonprofit. Just wanted to make that point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's something that Dan and I have been discussing as well. Dan, do you want to quickly touch on lobbying for nonprofits?
Yeah, nonprofits can lobby up to basically 20%. And I don't want to give legal advice, but the rule out of IRS, to the extent there is one, is that you can spend up to 20% of your dollars on lobbying, as long as it isn't a substantial portion of your activity, or as long as it's an unsubstantial portion of activity. So you can do it. And we have organizations here in Washington, nonprofits that are on the Hill every day advocating for children's rights and racial justice and so many other issues. So it's not a conflict as long as you're careful and ask your attorney for legal advice. Don't take it off the top of my head from me.
So we'll continue to massage that out, but there are opportunities for folks to get involved without putting their 501c3 designation in jeopardy. And so that's a great point as well, Elizabeth. It's not just about programs, it's about the common struggles that all statewide and community coalitions are facing in trying to promote these various opportunities. So the last question that we would love to hear from folks is if there's been successful mobilization or utilization of American Rescue Plan Act funding for trauma-informed supports. We would love to just have an opportunity for people to share, put in the chat, or you can come off mute. It's 2:00, so for those who have to roll off, thank you for joining. We'll probably take the month of August off, but we'll be back in touch during August to start scheduling next rounds of these calls, and we'll keep them moving and growing to continue to promote this outreach. So thank you. And for folks who have American Rescue Plan Act fund information, I will put myself on mute and look forward to hearing all about it. And if there's anybody on this call that was not on a listserv and found it elsewhere, please feel free to reach out to me at the email that I just put in the chat. And I am happy to add you to the list for future calls.
So if I may,
Please.
My name is Fitzroy Lewis, and I'm a facilitator for Communities That Care in Lebanon County, as we're seeking to implement it in 4 different communities. And this is the first time I've attended one of these meetings, and I've learned so much. I really appreciate the work that you all are doing and the need, how you're accentuating the need for us to inform and support each other, because the work that's necessary in order for us to be successful really revolves around greater collaboration. So I really appreciate the effort that you all are putting into your work. And I'm looking forward to learning more and participating going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Fitzroy. That was very kind. And if you don't mind putting your email in the chat or sending me an email, I would love to add you to our listservs. Anybody else have any thoughts, American Rescue Plan Act or otherwise, in our closing minutes?
Jesse, can I just ask you a question? This is Anne. This is the first time attending. I'm working on a lot of criminal justice system reform, but I've been an attorney for 22 years in the justice system. But I'm also in school right now for clinical mental health counseling at Rollins College. So I'll have that part of it soon. So I'm a part of a lot of organizations like this. And I'm wondering if anybody is aware of anything that is specifically aimed right now at the court systems or trainings for the judiciary, for prosecutors, for public defenders, for juvenile, delinquency courts. I'm also a guardian ad litem here, so I'm working in the dependency courts. And what I'm seeing over and over and over again is there's a whole pot of information and advocates, and they don't seem to make it into the criminal justice system. Like the people who need the information, who need to be trauma informed, just aren't. And I was wondering if there's any specific funding or anything you're seeing that would be great for us to like apply for or kind of get behind.
Let me take a first shot at that. There's an organization called the Association of Juvenile and Family Courts Association, something like that. I always get too many J's in there. Juvenile just, but they do trauma-informed training for court systems. So that's number one. Where are you located?
I'm in Orlando, Florida.
Okay. Now the second is there's a movement in Florida to create baby courts, infant courts.
I'm actually have a case in baby court. So we have one here in Orlando.
Okay.
And the judge and I have been meeting to try to train more. We have a lot of attorneys who are representing parents in that system who are not trauma informed. And so even in baby court, I'm running into
Oh, great.
parents. Like there's an attorney on a case right now and it's horrendous. Like
Great.
and not informed at all. And she's in baby court because there's such a shortage of attorneys available, I think, for appointment in these cases.
Yeah. We'll connect you with Mimi Graham at the Florida State University, who seems to be trying to advocate for more money from the state for that purpose.
That would be great. That would be fantastic.
And
then the third one I could recommend in North Carolina, due to the work of a couple of district attorneys, now I think the chief judge of the North Carolina state court system is requiring all of this personnel in the court system become trauma informed, and we can connect you to that. Elizabeth, did Carrie do an article on that on PACE's connection?
yeah, there is
On safe baby courts?
No,
on the
North Carolina.
Yes.
David Brothers.
Yeah.
So
And also, if I could,
sure,
since I'm here, there are several communities on ACES Connection that deal with justice issues, and the organization that Dan mentioned, it's the National Council of Juvenile and Family Judges, and there's such good work being done, and there's also a federal grant program under SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Agency, called the GAINS Center, GAINS Center. And but it's just sort of stunning. There's so many courts, so many judges, so many people in the system. While there's great work being done and a lot of progress, there's just so much to do. And this organization is really on top of it, the council.
yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I just joined the GAINS recently and have been trying to gather that information.
We can connect you also with a great group in Texas, where it's actually the Texas court system and Children's Hospital, I think, that are coordinating the program. And then in Memphis, the Chief Justice of the juvenile court system has made everybody in his system trauma informed. And I'm drawing a blank on his name, Dan somebody, but Elizabeth, were you about to say your email?
No. I was just
Oh, okay.
adding a comment.
We had a comment or question from Barb. Barb? do you
Yeah.
want-
Hi, everybody. My name is Barb Kaufman. I'm from New Jersey, and I'm the Director of Prevention Services at an organization called Prevention is Key. Probably since 2010, I want to say, I've gotten really interested in ACEs. We have formed the first ACEs action team well, the third in Jersey, the first in Morris County. So getting very involved in it. I was going to respond to Ann though, and Elizabeth beat me to it with the Gain Center, Samson's Gain Center. I found it. We have just written a grant to offer programs to the criminal justice professionals. And that was one of the webinars, the trainings that it was recommended. So look into that. But I just want to thank everybody, and I'm hoping that I'll be a part of this more. But thank you so much. I'm really interested in hearing from everybody to know what everybody's doing, and certainly to advocate. And the good news is, I am Senator Anthony Bucco, who is New Jersey State Senator, was going to sit in today, but couldn't. But I'm meeting with him Tuesday to give him all the information from this meeting and more. And hopefully, fingers crossed, he will sign on to the RISE Act. So that's really good news.
Oh, terrific. Thank you.
So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Barb. And we certainly hope to see you on future calls as well.
Surely, thank you.
So Jesse, I did add my email. I took yours down because I definitely would like to get in touch with you and talk a little bit more, if possible, about the work that you all are doing.
Done.
But I did want to talk a little bit about what Ann said. And I don't know if this is going to be relevant or not, Ann, but a company that I worked for previous to my current position here locally in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania, they serve as an organization that provides services, contracted services to juvenile probation. And one of the things that was implemented recently is for them to have a monthly meeting with a judge to have the representatives. So they have an advocate program. So they assign, the youth are assigned to an advocate, and then the organization meets, the whole group meets with a judge, and the judge reviews the progress that each youth is making as they are seeking to meet certain outcomes, so that they are not any longer under juvenile probation jurisdiction, or then sent to some residential facility. This was instituted because you're sending young people to residential placement. It's extremely expensive. It's a way to save money by keeping youth in community, but also holding them accountable to regularly meeting with the judge, juvenile probation officers, as well as the advocates and a therapist that is assigned to work with them. So everyone comes together and reviews youth progress, and that seems to be helping to keep them on track. Now, they just instituted this earlier in the year, so we don't have a lot of data to look at. Well, they don't, I don't work there any longer, but it's a model that can prove to be very effective because it's hands-on, it's close to home, and the parents are involved, and probation is involved, advocates are involved. So it has been proving to be beneficial, as I understand, thus far.
Thank you for that, Fitzroy. And similarly, I know of a program, I haven't seen it written up yet, but I know that they're working on it in Ramsey County, Minnesota. The county attorney, which is, they have county attorneys instead of district attorneys, is working on, it sounds like a very similar initiative, but to keep juveniles out of the court system. It's a model of community accountability that helps create sort of like reparations for actions without putting youth into juvenile justice or criminal justice systems, just as starting points. And please, if you in your research get more information, please feel free to share it with us and we can continue to disseminate to the group because it's very important. And it sounds like PACE's connection has a few criminal justice communities that are also excellent opportunities to promote that information as well.
Great, thank you very much.
No, thank you. And any other questions or comments or thoughts? Then hearing none, thank you all so much for the time and attention today. It was truly a wonderful opportunity and hopefully the first of many calls that we have together with a growing group of movers, shakers, and influencers around the country. Look forward to continuing to build the movement with all of you. Dan, any well-deserved last words?
No, just thank you all.
Sounds good. We'll be in touch. Continue to stay cool. Have a good rest of your summer. Stay safe and talk soon. Thanks so much for all you do.